And what you find through the generations is that there is not one family that is immune to the anger that is there. Not one. All of us tend to suffer from one piece. When we are ignored, something stimulates within us and anger arises. So the first one is that of attention. The second one, have you ever had your buttons pushed? I don't like what you're doing. Push. Have you ever had someone push your buttons? Make you angry, tick you off, just rub you the wrong way. There are button pushers out there. As a matter of fact, I know that Satan in your lifetime will place button pushers in your life. Intentionally. Because he knows if he can push that button of anger, he's got you. Fathers, how many times do we see our children pushing our buttons? How many times? Matter of fact, you could ask your child. I have. I've asked children, do you know how to make your daddy mad? Did you know that all of them would have a smile on their face, which is called a recognition reflex, and say, yeah. I said, so you know how to make your daddy mad? And they're like, yeah. So do you do it? And they're like, sometimes. They know. I ask them, do you know how to be able to get your mom mad? And they'll say, oh, yeah. They know. They know how to push mom and dad's buttons. They know how to be able to set off that NASA rocket. They do it. The third one is that of pride preservation. Individuals where their pride needs to be restored or their self-worth has been taken down. You look through scriptures, one of the most fantastic examples of it is when you see Saul transform. Do you remember that? The people were singing, David has killed his thousands. Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And the countenance of Paul's face changed as he seeks ways to preserve what? His pride, his self-worth. And Satan's got him. The fourth level in terms of dealing with anger is that of this. Interference of will. You're in my way, stop meddling. A provocation that you would see between religion and faith. You noticed it with the Pharisees and Jesus. Jesus directing people to have a direct connection with God. And the Pharisees realizing that in doing so will take them away from the legalistic applications of their religion. He saw Jesus interfering with their will. Have you seen that? Organizations, individuals, families, interfering with will, provoking the anger within. Number 5. You'll see anger set in when someone is trying to warn you. Children, your mom and dad are not trying to spark you to anger when they're telling you, get out of the street. Look both ways before you cross. Riding a bike, put your helmet on. They're not trying to spark anger. They're not trying to cramp your style. For our teenagers, be home before 11. They're not. It is a warning. Can you imagine what it was like for the prophets of old? Warning the people that God is coming, warning them of judgment. Can you imagine Noah building the ark? And for 120 years trying to preach a message that only 8 people accepted. The anger. And the last one is this. The call for justice. And that is where here God is looking at individuals and he's calling prophets to go out and speak. Many do not. You look at Jonah. Do you remember that? He didn't want to do what God called him to do. Instead, he chose to run. And he runs away from God. And God has one thing, and that is, Jonah, you could go ahead and go and do your will, but my will prevail. And God goes through a host of things to bring Jonah back. And he finally brings Jonah back, and after 3 days in the whale, Jonah comes out, and God gives him the same command that he gave 3 days earlier. Go to Nineveh. He goes, he preaches the message. He got there in 1 day. It took 3. He made it in 1. And he goes there and he speaks a message, and after he's done presenting the message, God's mercy comes on the people. And Jonah puts on a stew. He gets angry. It's hot. The digestive juices of that fish had burned through his skin, so the heat from the sun is affecting him more than usual. He sits on a hill and he's waiting. In mercy, God gives him a plant to shade him and then removes it. Oh, is that pushing a button? Jonah cries out for justice. What's wrong with this? God is asking him, Jonah, wasn't it I that put this there? I gave and I took away. Why are you angry at me? The call for justice. Many times in the world, we see injustice. Many of us, April 15, felt injustice. But we put it out there, and we're angry and we're upset. But we'll find that in these 6 areas, Satan will attempt to spark the anger. And within these 6 areas, Jesus then clumps it into one and gives us direction on how to deal with it. If you look at your Bibles in chapter 5, verse 20, as you read down, you'll find that he first starts out with this. You heard it said that those of old, that you should not murder. And whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother with that cause will be in danger of anger. Here's the first point that Jesus is making. It comes in a circle. Anger first starts in your heart and in your mind. The first level of anger that God addresses is that which is unspoken and that which is not verbalized or expressed in any physical manner. It's in your heart. You know, in counseling, there's so many young people, so many individuals I work with that have anger in their heart. Anger towards either what someone had did to them. Anger towards one of the 6 items there. There was anger. Anger because someone didn't show them enough attention. Like the older of the prodigal son. Sitting out there putting on a stew saying, look, I've done all these things, Lord. Or to your father. And yet I've not received recognition. God has something very specific for that type of anger. You see, one thing about anger at that level is that if it is not verbalized and expressed, and it is suppressed, in other words, it is kept in your heart, it will affect you. Internalized anger will lead to depression. You may not see it, but it's there. And all of a sudden, through time, you'll find that depression becomes normal. How many times that I'm dealing with individuals and they sit down, I'll give you an example. There's an individual I was working with 2 years ago. He was in my psychology class on teaching counseling. He was going to be a counselor. You know that physician heal yourself? And yet he told me that in his own life there was chaos, there was craziness that was going on that he couldn't understand. His parents were divorced and he was struggling with it. He said, for over 40 years, I'm dealing with this issue. And so I asked him, I said, see, the key in dealing with anger is this. Did you forgive your parents? And you know what he told me? He said, yes. Many times, I even verbalized to them, I told them I forgive them. I said, okay, that's good. But have you asked God to forgive them? He sat down dumbfounded. And he said, what do you mean? I said, let me put you this way. When Jesus, with all the things that happened to him as he was led to the cross, did your parents do any of that? Did they spit on your face? Did they pluck out your beard? Did they punch you? Did they hit you with a reed? Did they flog you? Did they nail you to a cross and then hang you in open shame? He said, well, not exactly. I mean, not physically. Emotionally, I felt that with my friends and those around me, but not physically. And I said, did you see what Jesus did to the individuals that did that to him physically? Look at his words, incredible words. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. What he is saying is very clearly this. In order for him to ask God the Father to forgive the people for what they did to him, he had to do what? First, forgive them himself. If you want to heal from those things that draw trauma in your life, the first forgiveness starts with forgiving them. The second part of healing that accompanies a blessing is when you ask God to forgive them. Jesus goes on. He says the next thing he says is this. Whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. And you wonder what that means. I went through looking at it, and it was more than simply an angry verbal expression. You see, one with anger is in your mind and your heart. Raka is a non-verbal expression of anger. It is when someone will show you anger without verbally telling you what that anger is about. They do it with their eyes. They may do it with their face. They may do it with a physical expression or a gesture. And what Jesus is saying as far as the council, it wasn't simply the Sanhedrin. He was speaking of a higher council. And when you look at the word, it's the same word mentioned in Revelation of the 24 elders. The council. All because of an expression of anger that is nonverbal. When you look at the disposition of that, a nonverbal expression of anger, when it's rooted in you, you will find that nonverbal expressions are rooted in what we call passive-aggressive. As a counselor, they would identify it as passive-aggressive personalities. Individuals that will not directly come at you with their anger, but they will come at you behind the scenes. As one individual said, they're like snipers. You never see them, but you feel their shots. It is an expression that sometimes is the most dangerous in taking down organizations. It is one for Jesus that he ends up calling them out in Matthew, later on in Matthew. But the Pharisees were very much snipers, passive-aggressives, and Jesus addressed them directly to call them out. The next one, if you look at those two, anger with your mind and your heart, anger that is nonverbal, there are two categories that you would see. One is the spewers, and the other one is the stewers. Stewers are like the pot. Or another way to express it is if I took a balloon and blew the balloon up, as I'm blowing the balloon up, you don't hear it pop, but you see it inflate. Those are stewers. They inflate things without exploding. Now I'm going to deal with those that are the explosive type.